My name is Alicia Middleman. I'm a curator at the Estes Park Museum. Today is February 27th, 2014, and we are in the training garage at Josh Wharton's home, and we will interview him today for the Estes Valley Oral History Mountaineering Project, which is a joint venture between the Estes Valley Library and the Estes Park Museum. Okay, what is your full name?
Joshua McKee Wharton.
And Josh, you grew up in New Hampshire, right?
Yep, southern New Hampshire, a little town called Nottingham.
And when did you first come to Estes Park?
I bet the first time I came here was when I was maybe 7 or 8, like on a family summer road trip. And we were going backpacking and hiking in places, and I think that was the first time I came to Estes. I think I hiked to Emerald Lake.
And your father, John Wharton, had been to Estes Park in the 1950s.
Yeah, my dad came in, I think, 59, summer 59. He went to school back east, and some friends of his went on a summer climbing road trip and drove out and went climbing here. And they went and climbed Shiprock in New Mexico, and they went to the Tetons and Devil's Tower and did like a little summer circuit.
Do you know how he got involved in climbing?
Yeah, so he grew up in Liverpool, England, and my grandfather and my grandmother were both climbers, like hikers and climbers. They would go to the Lake District every summer, and my dad's godfather's name was Scotty Guire, and he owned a guide service in the Lakes District. And so my dad used to spend his summers climbing with his godfather, and then also, once he got old enough, guiding for him. And so that's how he got into climbing, and through his parents.
Oh, wow. So they were hooked up to a rope. They were doing some technical climbing.
Yeah, I've actually got some photos of my grandfather doing some stuff that looks like properly hard with just a rope tied around his waist and like proper British formal wear. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it's in your blood.
Mm-hmm.
Then was it your dad that took you on your first climbs?
Yeah, I went climbing occasionally, like every couple of years with my dad, and his old climbing partner also had kids. But I didn't really actually like it. I would cry and stuff, and I thought climbing was awful. I was really scared of heights, and I was kind of a wimpy kid. So I did climb with my dad growing up, and we went to the Lake District once for like a summer trip when I was maybe 10 or 12, and did some other climbing around New Hampshire. But I didn't really start doing it on my own until I was a teenager in high school with friends of mine.
What was more appealing about it later on when you were a teenager?
Well, I think climbing kind of gives you a lot of independence and freedom. And so when I was doing it with my dad, it didn't seem as cool. But when I started doing it with my friends, it seemed cool, like it was an adventure for us to go out on our own and sneak away from school and go climbing and things like that. So.
Yeah. And then you came out to Estes Park again as a teenager on a road trip?
Yeah, so by the time I was maybe 16 or 17, I was starting to really fall in love with climbing. And after my junior year in high school, a friend and I loaded up our van and drove out here and went climbing, kind of like my dad had. We went here and Boulder and Tetons and Tuolumne and did a big circuit for the summer.
Do you remember specifically what you climbed in Estes?
I think that summer we climbed a couple days at Lumpy Ridge on the Book. I think the first route we did was Osiris, which I remember was like, felt horrible and hard because it was so flaring and we'd never climbed anything like that. So I think we climbed the Book a couple days, and then I think we went and did the Petite.
Wow, so you did a day at Lumpy and then a day in the Alpine.
Yeah.
Then after you graduated high school, you came to Boulder, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I came to see you in 97. I started school here.
Okay. And did you make very many trips up to Rocky Mountain National Park?
Yeah, for sure. As soon as I moved I kind of came to see you because I was into bike racing at the time. That's what I'd done through high school, and I thought I'd be on the bike racing team. And I did that for a month and then realized that I liked climbing way more and that it was way more fun. So I quit bike racing, and my dad wasn't that psyched about that, but anyway. And then I just started climbing like all the time. That's basically what I lived for. And so I would make trips all over the place up here, up to Utah. But yeah, started climbing here a lot. So.
What were some of your objectives back then?
Well, after my freshman year in college, we climbed the Diamond that next summer.
What route?
I think that summer I did the casual route, then we did vertical, and then we did yellow wall. And I was super motivated, so I wanted to climb it there a lot. And I was sort of like breaking into 510 and 511, and that kind of really opened up the place to a bunch of different climbs. So yeah, I'm sure I would come up to the park that summer after my freshman year of college, maybe at least once a week to go climbing. Probably, I did stuff like my dad's old route, like Sickle, and Birds of Fire on Chief's Head, and all the classics.
Can we talk about Sickle a little bit?
Sure.
That's a really interesting route. It's I think a 5.9 plus up on Spearhead. Why don't you describe it to me?
Yeah, so it's a route that my dad remembered really fondly. He really loved that one. He had fond memories of it. Spearhead's kind of a classic pyramid formation with a little summit on it, and the route, Sickle, goes straight up the main pyramid and has a bunch of nice 5.7 climbing on the lower part, and then kind of an intimidating roof slot near the top that I think my dad aid climbed at the time. And in fact, I do remember that he told me a story about that they went up, they tried it, and they didn't have enough pitons. So they went back to Boulder, got more pitons, and then went back and finished the route.
Wow.
And then I think a few years later, Royal Robbins did the first free ascent of the climb.
Yeah.
But he did it with a guy named Dick Sykes, who I think taught math at CU and was a friend of them somehow. He might have been a climbing ranger or something in the summer at the time here. And that's how they found out about that route. And yeah, that's all I know about it, really.
Wow. Did your father also climb with Dave Rearick?
Yes, that name sounds totally familiar. I think my dad did do some climbing with him. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So were you thinking about your dad when he climbed up there? Did you think about how different it would be with the gear that he had and what you had in comparison? Yeah,
I'm sure I did at the time. But I used to talk to my dad about climbing all the time. Once I got into climbing, he would, and when I was in college, it's funny, you would call up and most parents would be like, how's school going? Yada, yada. But my dad would be like, what'd you climb this week? And so I'm sure I talked to my dad about the route at the time. And I remember him telling me that there's a bolt on the final 5.7 slab traverse. And I remember him telling me that he was really upset that, I don't know which of his partners put that bolt in, but he thought it was totally unnecessary. So even like 40 years later, he was complaining about this bolt being there.
He didn't encourage you to chop it, did he?
No, he didn't. But but I thought that was pretty funny. So.
Wow, that's such a cool connection. When you were in college, did you start kind of identifying yourself as an alpinist or
for me back then, climbing didn't have like these, I'm a sport climber, I'm a boulderer, I'm a trad climber feel to it. It was kind of like you did a little bit of everything. Although I'd say I definitely didn't do as much sport climbing as I did other types of climbing, but I just think that climbing traditionally going back had been, you did a little bit of everything. And it was all sort of in preparation for doing big routes in the mountains, for doing alpine stuff. That's kind of like how my dad had approached it and taught me, and that's sort of how I looked at it too. So I didn't think of it as like I'm a rock climber or I'm an alpinist. It was just sort of all climbing to me, and I was excited about doing all of it.
With those same kind of ethics in mind, were you also raised kind of in the tradition that you never hang on gear? If you can't do the move, you down climb,
yeah,
figure it out?
To some degree. I think that actually in a lot of ways that held my climbing back, because when I learned from my dad, he told me that he only fell twice in 20 years of climbing. Climbing a lot. And so, and he told me that, if you fell off, you were probably trying something that was too hard for you. So so we did a lot of easy routes, a lot of easy climbs growing up, like top roping, doing tons of 5.5s and 5.6s and things like that. So I had a really slow progression. But when I moved to Boulder's such a hub of climbing and has been kind of like, has the highest standards in climbing, I'd say, in the States for the last 30, 40 years. Like that's where climbing's been being pushed the most. And so it's hard not to like see people out the cliff who are really good and learn from them and see what they're doing. So as soon as I moved to Boulder, I'd say my approach became less traditional in that way. So.
I think I heard you explain once that you've observed that in the United States there are fewer all-around climbers, kind of because of the geography. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so there's not really many places you can live in the States where you have access to all the different types of climbing. The Front Range is an exception. If you live in the East Coast, there aren't really truly big mountains. There aren't really very big cliffs, so you don't have access to big walls or to alpine climbing. But if you live in Estes Park, you could go alpine climbing one day, and then you could go down to Boulder and go bouldering the next day, and then the next day after that, you could drive to Ouray and go ice climbing. So you have access to all sorts of different types of climbing, and that's just not true in most places in the States. Whereas versus Europe, where there are a lot more all-around climbers, they have like really quick access. If you live at a place like Interlaken in Switzerland, you could go and climb the Eiger one day and then go sport climbing the next, and then go bouldering into Ticino the next. So you have access to things really quickly and easily. So.
After Boulder, you lived in Rifle, Colorado for a while.
Yeah, after graduating, my wife and I, well, she wasn't my wife at the time, but my girlfriend and I moved to the Western Slope because she got a job running like an art studio with a dance program there. And so we lived in Glenwood for a year, and then we bought a house in Rifle and lived in Rifle for 4 years, which was painful.
Then a few years ago, around 2010, was it?
Yeah.
You and your wife, Erin, moved to Estes Park.
Yep.
So what motivated you to move here?
Erin and I knew we wanted to get out of Rifle, so we were kind of like looking at different places. We thought about moving to Europe, and Erin actually got a job in Germany, so we were potentially going to go to Germany. But we were looking at going maybe to like the east side of California, somewhere around Bishop or up to Truckee, or coming to somewhere back in the Front Range, because we knew those were the best places that we'd both be happy and that I could still climb full time. And but when she got that job in Estes Park, we kind of were like, well, that's an opportunity we shouldn't miss, because if we go to Europe, we're just going to be there for a couple of years and we're kind of treading water. But Estes is a place we know we'd want to live for a long, long time. So that's how we wound up here.
And you have a lot of climbing partners here.
Yeah. I love living in Estes because the really unique thing is I have partners of every genre. I've got people I boulder with, I have people I go rock climbing with, people I go alpine climbing with, which is really cool, and I didn't have that all in Rifle. And it really helps to have motivated, fun people to climb with. So that's been great. I have like tons of people to climb with here.
Okay, now that you've been living in Estes Park since 2010, you've done a lot in the short time that you've been here in Rocky Mountain National Park.
Helps not to have a real job.
Tell me about link-ups and how this has kind of become a new part of the game.
I don't know if it's that new. Like link-ups have been around for a while. I'd say they're probably most inspired by, in the early 90s, Peter Croft and John Backer doing Half Dome and the Nose in a Day. And I'd say that's like kind of when people really like took note of that and wanted to link more features. And it's just a good way, if you've climbed a lot here and done most of the larger stuff, to make bigger objectives for yourself, to make a bigger challenge. So that's kind of how link ups come about. And I've done a bunch of link ups in the desert and in the Black Canyon and in Rocky Mountain National Park as well. So,
Tell me about the big one you did in Rocky Mountain National Park.
which one are you talking about?
The diamond and
Like going off into like spearhead and stuff in
Yes.
Arrowhead recently?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so a couple years ago, my friend John Dickey and I did a link up where we climbed Ariana on the diamond, and then we did Stone Monkey on spearhead, and then we did Ithaca on Arrowhead. So kind of like the 3 classic 12As in the park in a day. And it makes really good sense because it's kind of a perfect horseshoe shape, so you're not walking out of the way for any of it. And I hadn't done Stone Monkey or Ithaca beforehand, so it was kind of a cool. They're both routes that I wanted to climb, but they're also kind of a long walk for not that much climbing. So it was kind of a nice way to go climb those routes, but make it a bigger day. So yeah, it was really cool. It was a fun adventure.
wow.
So.
Did it go smoothly?
Yeah, it went easily enough. Yeah, it was totally fine. We parked our car. I think we started at like 4 a.m, and my wife Erin moved a car for us from the Longs Peak Trailhead over to the trailhead by Glacier Gorge, so that when we walked out, we would have a car there to come out. And I think it took us 19 hours car to car or something like that. So, yeah.
Another first ascent that you had done was the 2 Dragons on the south side of Hallett's Peak. Can you tell me about that climb?
Yeah, 2 Dragons is actually it's on the east face of the Dragontail Spire, right above the Dragontail Couloir. And there is a summer rock climb called Dragon Slayer, kind of obscure 511 plus. And my friend Steve Sue and I, who's done a lot of winter climbing in the park, climbed that route in winter. And I noticed a series of roofs going out to the right after the first pitch. And it kind of had like a scrappy look of mixed climbing, there's like some big hummocks in it to swing into and some grass on it. It didn't really have any ice on it, but it looked like kind of a good Scottish style objective. And so a couple weeks later, I went back and tried that as well, and it turned out to be a really cool, good route.
What's a Scottish style objective?
Well, in Scotland, it has a long tradition of winter climbing. But it's kind of an odd thing because there's so much moisture in the air there, like snow plasters to the cliff in the winter, and they get really thin ice and snow plastered to the cliff. And so there's not really like ice in the way that we think of ice climbing, like big drips of ice formed by waterfalls, but there's bits of ice around, and there's a long tradition of doing summer rock routes in the winter there. So, and that's like the way people train for big alpine routes. And it turns out that that's like really excellent training, because usually the hardest climbing you do in the mountains is snow-covered rock. It's not actually the ice climbing. So there's been a tradition of people doing that in Rocky Mountain National Park for many, many years. And I've just sort of like fallen into that tradition and started to do some of it in the winter here, but it's obviously not as popular as it is in Scotland. Yeah, so.
I see. And on that day that you did 2 Dragons, you had somebody filming it too, is that right?
Yeah.
What's that like, trying to focus on something that's never been done before, and yet there's a camera in your face?
For me, it doesn't really change it that much, because if you're trying something that's actually hard for you, you have to be pretty focused on it. And so you can't really, like a lot of people, you'll often hear people say that they think that it takes the commitment away and stuff if there's, in the climbing world, if there's a cameraman there. And I actually don't think that that's that true. There is definitely like a safety element. For instance, if I was in a really bad spot or something, or climbed through a hard section and then suddenly discovered there's no gear, I could be like, John, throw me the rope, right? The guy who's filming. So there does take some commitment away, but at the same time, I think like often if you're trying something that's hard for you, you're just in the moment and you're focused on what you're doing. And so the cameraman doesn't have anything to do with that. It's not like he's, you're not about to like grab his foot or anything. So to me, it doesn't really change it very much. Sometimes it makes it more fun because you get to go back and look at the climbs you did and see what they're about. And I've worked a lot with John Dickey in Rocky Mountain National Park, and it's a nice thing to do because he is here in Boulder, and it's not very difficult for us to shoot together. He like knows what he's doing. He's a real deal climber, and so it's easy for us to, and it's good for me with Patagonia through work to get some footage and photos, and so it kind of balances out. It's a great thing.
Yeah, how does that come to be? Is it your sponsors like Patagonia or Scarpa asking you to meet a quota of how many climbs are filmed, or you have a friend, John Dickey, who says, I'd really like to capture some climbing this winter?
It can be anything, but it's not nearly as formal as you would think. Usually what it is Jane Sievert, who runs the photo department at Patagonia, is looking for photos or video of a new jacket that's going to come out. She needs like photo assets of this jacket, or she needs video assets. So she'll send an email out to several of the ambassadors that says, hey, I'm looking for photo assets. If you get out with this jacket, or if you have any photos, please send them to me. And I'll think, okay, I'm going to go try this new route in a couple of days, or I'm going to go try this climb. I'll call up John and say, I just got an email from Jane. She wants to shoot this piece. Let's just go film this route. I'm going to go climb it anyway. So why not come along and shoot it? And then boom, two birds with one stone kind of thing. So it's nice. It's often like that, but sometimes it'll be a route we think is really cool. And then or John really wants to shoot, and he'll say, hey, let's go shoot this. And then may or may not sell the videos or the photos later. So.
I see. What's it like being a sponsored climber?
It's been really good, actually. It's a bizarre thing in the sense that a lot of people think that you play and don't really work hard for a living. And that's true in some levels, because it doesn't ever feels like work, because it's stuff that I would do anyway. But at the same time, I do work really hard in a way that some people might not get, like with training and getting up early to go do routes. And so it can be a lot of work at the same time. But I feel really lucky, because I don't think there are that many people that manage to scrape out a living as a full-time climber. So I feel really lucky to have been able to do that. And I hope I can continue to do it. And I think being with Patagonia is especially lucky, because they really involve us with like the design process of things that are coming out and in the pipeline, and in getting photo assets for catalogs and writing and things like that. So it helps you feel more involved, and it's not just going out and being a cool guy and climbing,
Yeah. It sounds to me like being a professional climber involves this whole puzzle of sponsorships and grant writing, and being your own coach. Mm-hmm. It's a complicated thing, it seems to me. When you go after some grants, how do you express in your writing the importance of a climb you want to go do?
It's not that complicated, because the grant committee, the people who are looking at the applications, are really well-traveled climbers who have done lots of amazing climbs. So they have a really good sense for what objectives and what climbs are interesting. And so you don't have to really sell the objective too much. It's really a question of, what have you done as a climber, and how exciting and inspiring is this objective? And then do those two fit together, and so should they give you some money to try to support it? So,
can you give me an example of a climb that you did where you applied for a grant and then planned an expedition?
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of grants, actually. I've been really fortunate to get a lot of grants. As a young climber, I think they made a really big difference for me. Like when I was doing my first trips to Asia, to Pakistan, and didn't have very much money, and really kind of needed the money to make the trip happen. So, for those trips, like one of the first trips I did was to the rock spire called the Flame in Pakistan, in the Trango Valley. That was in 2002. and we had a Lyman Spitzer grant, as well as some mountaineering fellowship grants for that trip. And they basically covered, like half the cost. So it made what would be a $6,000 trip per person, a $3,000 trip per person, and made it like reasonable for us to pull it off. And at that time, since I wasn't as experienced a climber, it was kind of harder to get those grants because I didn't have as much of a climbing resume. But I was really passionate about what we were going to do, and I think that was reflected in the grant application. And it's just a process of like writing what you're going to do and laying it out, and hopefully you'll get some support. So yeah, but the American Alpine Club's amazing that way. So it's a really good resource for young climbers.
Let's talk a little bit about your training here. What kind of training do you do in Rocky Mountain National Park or Estes Park to prepare for places like Patagonia, where you just recently were, or Pakistan?
So, there's just going climbing, and then there's training. They're like two different things, I think. So when if I'm going someplace that's like got a lot of winter climbing, then I try to do some climbing in the winter in the park, so it's sort of specific to that kind of climbing. And I think of that as like skill training. So basically when you go climbing, you're skill training, but then there's physical training too, and that might be going out on your skis and doing like, hard lap at Hidden Valley, or depending on what your objective is, it might be bouldering in here, or climbing on the tread wall, or going for runs. So it kind of depends what your goal is. It's like you're training specific to that. So
there's a really great film out there of you climbing up the Englishman's route in the wintertime. And in it you say, this is a good climb to do when you're tired.
Yeah.
So what's going on in your mind when you do that?
Well, most of the time when you're climbing a route like the Englishman's route, you're staying on your feet. So you're not getting pumped. It's not that physical. And when you do go to a big range like the Himalaya, you're ordinarily doing climbs that take a few days. And so you're going to be climbing tired. So I often will do like the specific training, which might be climbing on the tread wall or running or going to Hidden Valley, the day before I go and do a climb like the Englishman's route. So I'll be somewhat tired when I'm going there. And I find that when I'm tired, I tend to climb better than I might when I'm fresh, because I'm like focused on climbing well rather than trying to like muscle my way through the climbing.
In addition to the Englishman's route, what are some others that are good for that type of training?
Hallett's is perfect for winter climbing because it's like a relatively short approach, and it tends to get plastered with snow. And so the Slit is one of my favorite climbs on Hallett's. And I've done the Love route in winter, and Jackson Johnson in winter, and Hallett's Chimney obviously is a good one. So that Hallett's is great, but there's all sorts of cliffs all over Rocky Mountain National Park with that style of climbing. Basically all you need is to be like somewhat nasty weather, and that's it. So you can go climb anywhere. I just try to steer clear of like super classic rock climbs, because if you're climbing with crampons and ice tools, you don't want to be messing up the rock. So I wouldn't go climb something like Sickle or D7 on the Diamond or something. Like steer clear of the routes that have, maybe fragile features but luckily there's so few mixed climbers, it doesn't really matter. It's not that big of an impact. So.
Speaking of mixed climbers, we spoke to Kelly Cordes recently, and he talked about days where he's out in the park doing some mixed climbing, and you can see over to Lumpy Ridge, and it's sunny and warm, and you guys are just getting beaten up with bad weather inside the park. Have you had experiences like that?
Oh yeah, I think the park in winter is actually one of the gnarliest places you can climb. I think it's nastier in the park than it is in Patagonia in the winter in general. It's super windy. It's often snowing there, even if it's not really actually snowing, just from blowing snow. And it's really, really cold, or can be. So yeah, I think climbing in the park in winter is pretty full on, about as real deal as it gets, for sure.
How do you have a reputation for going light and just kind of suffering through some of the bad weather and things of that nature? What's the dialogue in your mind to get through that?
I think it's just a question of like wanting to do the climb. I mean, there's nothing really complicated about it. It's just a question of like, how bad do you want it? And if you want it really badly, then you're willing to put up with quite a lot. And if you don't want it very much, then you might turn around before you even get there. So there's nothing all that special about it. It's just a question of, I think I try to keep in mind, like, especially if I fly across the world to go climbing, I try to keep in mind that, hey, there was a lot of like effort and time that was put into this route. So let's give it our all. It's not that easy to just come back tomorrow. Whereas around here, I might not try quite so hard, because I might be like, well, I can just come back next week or whatever it might be. So.
You had a pretty bad injury in rifle when you fell and hurt your back, and that was it took a lot to heal from it. Did you ever think about doing something besides climbing after something as dramatic as that happened?
Not really, actually. I wish I could say that I did, but actually, as soon as I got hurt, all I wanted to do was go climbing again. So yeah, I didn't really, a lot of people said that to me, like, oh, you should write a guidebook or work on a book or look for some other avenues. And I was just like, yeah, I need to get healthy and get fit again. So that was kind of my focus through, which was a scary time too, because I didn't know how I would recover from that. So I didn't know how that would work out, but it did, luckily.
Okay. Tell me about the Dunn West Bay route that you did.
So the Dunn West Bay is an aid climb on the right side of the diamond, first done by Jimmy Dunn and Billy West Bay, I think in the early 70s sometime. And it is most of the rock on the right side of the diamond is not very good. It's kind of a little bit chossy, but this route actually has really good rock. And starting maybe, I'm not sure, maybe 10 years ago now, Andy Donson and Pete Takeda started working on free climbing it. And they added bolts to make a variation off of one section that was particularly thin off the aid climb. And but never were able to free climb this one crux pitch on the route. And so when I moved to Estes, I kind of knew about that. I knew they hadn't really been actively working on it for a while. So I called Pete to make sure it was okay if I went and climbed on the route. And then started working on it that summer, which involved taking 200 meters of static rope to the top of the diamond and then throwing the rope off the top, and then I'd mini traction, so top rope solo on the climb to see if all the moves went, see if I could free climb it. And then once I'd spent a couple days doing that and knew that I could free climb the route, then I went and led it from Broadway and did the first free ascent.
Wow. Who was your climbing partner that day?
My friend Kevin Cochran, a college buddy, just Jumar'd behind me. On a difficult free climbing like that, it often really helps to have someone Jumar for you, because then they can carry extra water and food, and you don't have to pull the rope up belaying. And it's sort of a selfish endeavor in the sense that it's all about you and trying to do the climb. But it's nice to have your friends support you, and then hopefully you reciprocate at some point and go Jumar or support them on some climb.
I see. Was the route kind of wet or?
Yeah, the top of the route is, the reason why the rock is so good is because the route gets brushed by water, which cleans it, has cleaned it over time. And that side of the diamond is notoriously wet. Some summers, if you're lucky, it will be dry. But when I actually climbed the Dun West Bay, the last two 512 pitches were like dripping with water, which was really miserable and cold. But luckily managed to do it. But I think if you could catch it dry, it'd be like one of the nicer routes on the Diamond, but it's pretty rarely dry. And then just this past summer, Tommy Caldwell did like the direct version, the actual original aid line, which, so the version I had done like diverged from the aid line for maybe 100 feet, and he did the direct version, which is the first 514 on the Diamond. So the other version was the second 513 on the Diamond, and now there's a 514 on the Diamond too, which is pretty cool to have that kind of high level climbing at altitude. So
yeah. And Tommy's a friend of yours. Does it feel sort of competitive, or?
Not real. I mean, not
What
really,
is the
because,
nature of it?
well, one, Tommy's a much better rock climber than I am, like much better. So there's really no competition at all, you know. But if anything, it just feels really nice to have another time climber in town to climb with and get out with and train with, that has like similar experiences to me. And so I feel really lucky to have Tommy as a friend and as a climbing partner here in town. It's a really nice thing.
How do you train together?
He comes here to the garage all the time to train on the tread wall or to go bouldering. And then he just was recently in Patagonia, and he hasn't done much ice or mixed climbing. So we went up to the park for a day and climbed a rock route, summer 511 in crampons and ice tools, and so that he could get some experience doing that and get tuned in for his Patagonia trip. So just like that, we'll just help each other out, you know, like he's loaned me rope before, like bunches of static rope to go mini tractioning in the Diamond, and I loan him ice tools and things that he might need for a project, or give him advice about different alpine climbing things, what you might bring. So just like feeding ideas back and forth off each other. And then, and then the physical stuff, like going to Hidden Valley and like racing each other up and like trying to do boulder problems together and work on them together, things like that. So
I can imagine that camaraderie is really important for you, because even though climbing is growing in popularity, it's still relatively small.
Yeah.
And you guys are kind of breaking ground with what's possible in climbing and making it a profession. So without really any model, you know, any generations before you doing this.
Yeah, I think a lot of climbing at the upper end is about being creative, you know, and coming up with like new ideas and new things to do. It's not necessarily about the physicality of it. That's changing a little bit in things like bouldering and sport climbing, which are the more popular types of climbing. And there are so many people who are so talented at that now with climbing gyms. So that level is really skyrocketing. But when it comes to like alpinism and you know, strange forms of climbing, like doing hard stuff on the Diamond, you know, there's not that many people involved. So it does help to have somebody else who's doing that kind of stuff, and you can bounce ideas off and say, oh, that's a cool idea, or oh, that doesn't sound so great, or, you know, who really knows what they're talking about. Because if for like your average person, like it's hard to understand what is something that's really cool and what's not so cool. You know, like climbing's really subtle that way, and so it doesn't really have, it's not obvious what might be super hard or what might not be very hard. So
Did you ever have an idea of something to do and then a friend kind of talked you out of it just because of those subtleties, saying, you know, had you thought about
yeah,
this or that?
I'm sure I've had I'm like a bazillion ideas that weren't that cool, and then a bazillion that were that cool. So yeah, I'm trying to think of something specific recently that wasn't that great of an idea. Trying to do I don't know, Tommy has this idea of trying to do like a V14, a 514, and the Diamond in a day. So it's like 3 14s. And I think that's kind of a cool idea, but I actually don't think it's that great of an idea, because if you have all those things wired, it's not as cool. Like, once you know a route and know how to climb it, it's much easier to do it again. So it's kind of like doing something like that is less creative than doing something new to me, than doing something that's like, you know, really putting yourself out there for that kind of objective is more like a gymnastics routine. Like you're like rehearsing something until you have it perfect, and then boom, you do it, and it's not as interesting or out there. And I think I've done like similar things, like trying to do an M11, a V11, and a 514 in a day, which I haven't done yet, but I'd like to do that. And that's kind of like not that creative of an idea, I don't think. Even though people might think that sounds really awesome, it's sort of like not that fancy to pull that off, really. So,
What other goals do you have for the future?
this year I'd like to do the hallucinogen wall in a day in the Black Canyon, which is like a big wall-free climb. I've tried a couple times, but haven't quite pulled it off. And I'd like to go to Alaska this spring for a quick trip, maybe like 10 days. Some free climbing in the Wind Rivers this summer. 2 trips there. And do some hard boulder problems and some hard rock climbs locally. Yeah. So that's this year. I've got a new daughter, so I don't want to spend too much time away from home this year. So.
Yeah, actually, that's something I respect a lot about some of the trips that you plan. You've been to Pakistan several times, and you have friends there. Same with Alaska. You return, and the Black Canyon as well. So I like that you kind of have a commitment to these places in that respect. Does being a sponsored climber in any way affect some of the decisions you make when you're in a scary place like the Black Canyon? Or
I don't think so. Not for me. I mean, there really aren't pressures from sponsors and things to like pull off climbs. You don't get that. I mean, maybe some people do, but I've never experienced that. So I think the thing about climbing is it's a small sport and there's not a lot of money in it. So if you want to be a full-time professional climber, you really have to love climbing. You really have to want to do it for yourself. So I'm like super driven and motivated to climb regardless of what's going on with sponsors or whatever that might be. And I've never had a shortage of coming up with ideas for like goals and projects. Like I've always got a list longer than I'll ever do. So when I'm climbing, it's about things that like inspire me, that I really want to do, that I'm excited about. It's not about what somebody else might want me to do or somebody else might climb. And I think that that's a way to have longevity in the sport. Like I think at the point where you decide that you're doing this because you think you should, or because it's what you're good at and that you should just push that, then that's when you're gonna like fall out of love with the sport and it won't be the same anymore. So
yeah. What other climbers out there inspire you?
Tommy inspires me for sure. He's somebody I look up to a bunch. I mean, tons of climbers have inspired me through the years. Steve House has inspired me a lot. In the younger generation, right now, Hayden Kennedy inspires me. Lots of like older climbers that have been mentors to me have inspired me. Like Chris Galperud is an older climber. Somebody who climbed for 30, 40 years and like still really loves it and is really excited to go out all the time. So because that's where I want to be when I'm 50 or 60 or 70, hopefully still climbing, still excited, and still, have projects and things I want to do. And so some of those guys like that really inspire me. There's a British climber named Paul Ramsden that really inspires me.
How come? What is he doing?
He does like all sorts of adventurous alpine trips, which I find really cool, with another guy named Mick Fowler. And those two guys, they both have like normal jobs and families, but they go on these crazy adventure climbs all over the place, and that's really cool. And then I think like right now, on a personal like day-to-day level, the climber that inspires me the most is a Scottish guy named Dave McLeod, who is really good at all aspects of climbing. He's bouldered like V14, and he's climbed 14 plus, and he has climbed alpine routes, and he's done everything at a really, really high level, and he's really thoughtful and smart in his approach to climbing. So I really appreciate that, and I definitely look to him as for inspiration for the kind of climbing I want to do, because he's good at everything, and that's kind of what I enjoy too, is trying to be good at everything. So
Yeah. I think I just want to end on one more topic, and that's being an all-around climber. And as I was explaining before, it seems to me like the title of an all-arounder is kind of widening. Traditionally, it meant ice climbing, mixed climbing, rock climbing, doing all of those disciplines well. And now, someone like you, Josh, who participates and wins the Ouray Ice Festival in front of a big crowd, and then also plans expeditions to these really isolated places in the world. It seems like it involves a lot more.
Well, I think it comes back to just like my climbing background and how I grew up from that traditional point of view, and like being into all sorts of different stuff. Now younger kids coming up, most people learn to climb in the gym. And if you're good, you probably gravitate towards sport climbing and bouldering, because that's naturally, like, if you're a talented climber, that's what you do. Like, to get good at alpine climbing, you need to have a lot of experience. You have to do a lot of easy routes first to build up that experience. Same thing is true with traditional climbing. So I feel like I was kind of in a lucky niche. I came around at a lucky time where I was able to kind of, explore all the different aspects of climbing, and maybe not be great at any of them, but be pretty good at all of them, And so yeah, I don't know. I've just been lucky that way, I guess, and just enjoy all of it, which maybe some people enjoy one aspect more than the other, so they gravitate towards that.
I think that's pretty rare, because you have to train so hard in all of those to really improve.
Well, I mean, physically, some of them aren't as hard as the other ones. So, like, alpine climbing has a lot more mental aspects to it than something like bouldering, which is basically like pure physicality. So I found the more experience I get, the more I can get away with just physically being good, and then I can kind of cheat the other stuff. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't need to go practice the scary types of climbing as much, because if I'm physically strong, I know I'm like mentally capable of doing it. I have enough confidence, self-confidence, and experience that I think I can pull those things off. So it's more about being physically fit for me at this point.
I see. Are there any last stories you want to share?
I don't think so.
Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks.